Ronka is fat. Ronka likes food. Ronka is fat because she likes food. Ronka needs to lose weight. Ronka needs to lose weight because she's fat. If she keeps eating, she's not going to lose weight and she's always going to be fat. It just doesn't give up. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And yes, this video was meant to be up on Saturday morning and it's now past 3 on Saturday afternoon. I'm just sitting down to record it, so that tells you about the kind of week I have had. The kids are currently playing in the garden, but I do not doubt one of them will come screaming through the back door while I'm trying to record this because someone took longer on the trampoline than the other person should have. Like, I don't know. Don't care about kiddie dramas. I want to get this video filmed. So today is my January wrap up and I read 5 books in January, so substantially more than I had read in the 3 months towards the end of 2021, but not really up to my usual pace. But I'm totally fine with that. I really enjoyed pretty much all of the books that I read, and so I'm just going to take you through them in the order that I read them. So first up, I read Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix, starting my year off with something very different to the usual kind of book that I would read. This book had been on my TBR for quite a while, and I'll admit that it was definitely like a style over substance choice. I definitely wanted to read this book based on the fact that it's designed like an IKEA catalogue, and I thought that was so intriguing, like totally different from anything that I had come across before. So I bought it mainly for that reason. I think I had bigger expectations than this book could match, and that might be the fault of whatever website or blog that I heard about this book from. I don't think this was a BookTube recommendation, because I thought the whole thing would be like an IKEA catalogue, and though thinking of the actual practicalities of that and whether you would get a decent readable story out of something that took that concept that far is probably highly unlikely. Instead, really, it's the cover, which, as you can see, it's got like the prices and the IKEA-like names and some spooky pictures. That and like the chapter pages that make it like an IKEA catalogue with a couple of other elements thrown in, but it is genuinely a book. But if I was disappointed about that, it didn't last long, because this book clearly wanted to be more than just a stylistic gimmick, because there's actually a decent story here. This is the first Grady Hendrix that I've read. So this is set in like a wannabe IKEA furniture store called Orsk. And it follows a group of employees and the horrors that they face when they're asked to work out of hours overnight one night to get to the bottom of some strange goings on that have been happening across the store. But instead of finding like a vandal or a homeless person or something, what they actually come up against is much more sinister and terrifying, and as the night goes on they turn from investigators to being the victims of like the sadistic horrible supernatural presence. I'm not really a horror reader. I think my skepticism for all things supernatural, mystical, makes it hard for me to be convinced, particularly when it's in a book. Some horror movies will make me jump and things, but not really books. But that doesn't matter here really at all, because this book is so much fun. Because for me it was more like a satire, a comment on consumerism and working life, rather than something that was going to keep me awake at night. It's really clever, and I can only assume that Grady Hendrix has worked in an IKEA or at the very least some form of retail, because the observations and the details in this book are far too spot on to have come from an outsider. And I thought that the characters were a lot of fun as well. They're crafted well enough to keep them just back from the brink of being total stereotypes. And the horror element itself, I thought that played out well. You know, I couldn't stop turning the pages. It might not have frightened me, but it definitely kept me reading because I wanted to see who, if anyone, survived. So yeah, this was a lot of fun and a great way to start the year. After that, I moved on to a classic, and I went with Agnes Grey by Bronte. And after I'd read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall a couple of years ago, I decided that Anne was probably my favourite Bronte because the feminism and the characters in that book spoke to me far more than like the shitty people doing shitty things. That is Emily, yes, Emily wrote Wuthering Heights, and the kind of, I mean, in Jane Eyre it's kind of a vibe of like he's an arsehole but I love him anyway, and although I do like those books, there was something different and special about Tenant of Wildfell Hall that I just liked more. And this book has not changed my Bronte ranking. I think Anne is probably still my favourite. So this is about Agnes, who is a young woman, and her family are facing financial dire straits. So she decides to strike out on her own as a governess to pay her own way. But her experiences are a far cry from the image of this life that she had in her head. Her pupils are totally spoiled, out of control, really rude, and then their parents are, you know, equally vile. And so it's really not an easy life for Agnes. She's really inexperienced, she's really young, and she's left feeling beaten down and basically just losing her faith in humanity. A glimmer of sunlight shows through this though when she meets someone that she has feelings for, but she is worried that she's right when she thinks the happiness is not for the likes of her. And much like with The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I felt Anne really had the measure of society and the restrictions that were placed on women at the time when she wrote this book. And for its time, I think this book really does have a feminist core. Maybe not so much as Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I think she wrote this one first because obviously it was gentle enough to be published at the time, but it's still peppered with insights and commentary about the walls that kept women hemmed into their, like, you know, kept in their place. Agnes isn't necessarily breaking these walls down, but she is definitely pounding her fists against them. And, you know, I enjoyed her. I really enjoyed the other characters in this book, especially how critically drawn many of them were. I think Agnes is a realistic portrait of a woman trying to find her place in a world which she doesn't wholly accept. And purple isn't usually my thing, but look how pretty my edition of this is. This is a, oh, I don't know what it is. It's like what the little polar bear, I always forget. An Arcturus publication, and I've got a blue copy of Villette in the same style as well, which maybe I'll get to later this year, maybe I won't. My next book was a NetGalley, and it was Wahala, but oh, I'm having a total brain fart. I can't remember who it's by. I'll put it on the screen. No, it's gone. I want to say Nikki something, but I think I'm just making that up. But this recently came out, and I picked this mainly because I've been really reading some good stuff by African writers in the past year to 2 years. And so when I saw that this was a book about mixed race Nigerian English women, it kind of piqued my interest. And it's also a book about a female friendship group, and I love books about female friendship, so I felt I had to kind of give this one a try. So this book is about Ronka, Boo and Simi, who have been friends. They met when they were at university and now they're in their mid-30s. And although their lives are very different from each other now, they're still pretty much as close as ever. But when Isabel, a friend from Simi's past, turns up and infiltrates the group, cracks start to show between all the interrelationships. And those cracks turn into gaping, jagged holes, which really test the women, their friendships, and their lives as they understand them. And so I'll admit that like this is probably more of a kind of commercial contemporary women's fiction book than I would typically choose, and to begin with I wasn't sure how much I was going to enjoy it. But as the book gains speed and the influence of Isabel starts to work its way into the women's lives, I did get hooked. And I really enjoyed that Nigerian culture plays a really big part of this book, and it's translated through the lens of being in a British setting and of the mixed race experience. And there are a lot of interesting observations of what it is to be a black woman raised mainly in Britain and mainly by a white parent, as well as being in a mixed race relationship. What didn't sit quite right with me was that it did lead to quite a lot of colorism and comments which I felt were verging on racist, which I wasn't sure if that really sat right with me. And although this book explores other more universal themes for women, like the whole career versus motherhood thing, or trying to find a decent relationship, or, you know, trying to have it all and hating every minute of it, and the fact that you know the friendships in this book are realistically drawn, because there's love there, but there's also jealousy and frustrations, all in that mix. But this did make for characters that I really didn't like, and I've said loads of times before that I don't mind reading characters that I don't like, but in this book I think Ronka is the only decent person, and even then she isn't without her flaws. And although Isabel, it's not a spoiler I don't think to say that she is the villain of the piece, it was actually Boo that I hated the most. I just thought she was self-entitled, selfish, a total narcissist who thinks she deserves everything, whilst giving absolutely nothing in return. And yeah, like I said, I don't usually mind reading unlikable characters, and so, you know, if that's done well, that can actually be really, really good and fun and interesting. But I felt with Boo, her story arc was the least satisfying of all of them in the book. I won't give spoilers, but I was really annoyed at how her one played out. And then I had to just knock a star off for the fat shaming in this book. It is unrelenting. We're reminded at every turn that Ronka is fat. Ronka likes food. Ronka is fat because she likes food. Ronka needs to lose weight. Ronka needs to lose weight because she's fat. If she keeps eating, she's not going to lose weight and she's always going to be fat. It just doesn't give up. And it can even be defended by it being like the viewpoint of a certain character, because it's actually steeped into the narrative. And when when it was revealed that Ronka is actually a size 14, I nearly threw my Kindle across the room. I was that fucking angry. I just thought it was totally uncalled for. It didn't add anything to the story, and it left a really bad taste in my mouth. So this book actually had the potential to be amazing, even with its like bonkers ending, but it had some pretty major issues that I couldn't really look past, which is such a shame. I'm pretty sure this will end up being a booktube darling and people will love it, but it just didn't quite hit the mark for me. My kids are back in from the garden. Yes, we did have tears. They are now playing with trains right outside my door, so apologies for any noise. The next book I went on to was Black Mamba Boy by Nadifa Mohamed. This is the first kind of shelter box book club book for the year, and I'm really trying to get back on track of that, and this is a good one to do that with. So this is the story of Jama, who is actually the author's father, although she does say that I think it's like there's an interview at the back of the book, she does say that it's not a strictly accurate portrayal, but he's a Somalian, and he travels over East and North Africa on the search for his father and for his place in the world. And it's set just before, I think, during and just after the Second World War. So we meet Jama when he is just 10 years old, and he's basically a street child in Yemen, and we follow him as he travels through many countries, including back to Somalia, to his family for a while, on his search for a father who has never really been in his life. He has to tackle Italian fascists, British colonists, obviously the war and the dangers of the land, but he does make it to Egypt, finds a job on a ship to England, which is actually transporting freed Jewish prisoners who are now being moved out of Israel and taken back to Europe. This book isn't necessarily an easy read. Jama faces loads of hardships, and particularly because he is so young, the brutality of his life is harrowing to learn about. And I was glad for the few moments there are where he actually gets to be a child, such as childhood was in that time and situation. There is really a lovely friendship between him and some other of the street boys. But then even that does have a heartbreaking outcome. But Jama is a really determined young man, and although not all of this is his true story, it's clear why Mohamed wanted to honour her father with this book, and I think she really does honour him. Her prose it's pretty effortless, and her descriptions of the landscapes and of the people, they're vivid and rich. And although Jama faces so many challenges, there's death and torture and poverty and fear all through his journey, this book isn't gratuitous about that. It just doesn't shy away from the brutal realities of well, not just Jama, but many Africans during that time. But it's paired with quite soothing language. So yeah, great start to my Shelter Box Book Club reading year with that one. And then my last book for January was Maggie and Me by Damien Barr. So on reading and loving this book so shortly after I had read Shuggie Bain, it became apparent that the stories of wee gay boys growing up in Thatcherite ravaged Glasgow is my jam, and wee Damie is definitely joining Shuggie in occupying a special spot in the bookshelf of my heart. So this is the memoir of he's a journalist, he's an author, he's a broadcaster, but this is looking at his childhood growing up in the 80s and 90s in an area outside Glasgow called Motherwell. And I've been meaning to read this ever since I saw his big Scottish book club on BBC something, BBC Two probably. One of the episodes was actually filmed in my town, and I was just absolutely captivated by his warmth and his love of books. He's a really endearing presenter. And I'm also always interested in reading about my country during that time period where Margaret Thatcher and her Tory cronies seemed hell-bent on destroying Scotland. So we join Damien as his family are falling apart. His mum is leaving his dad for another man, and she takes Damien and his sister with her. Damien is having to cope with seeing his beloved father less, in return for a complete arsehole of a stepdad, whilst trying to navigate the world of primary school as his sense of being different is definitely growing. So we follow him as he grapples with his sexuality against a backdrop of increasing poverty and his once industrial town being decimated by the closure of the ironworks, which employs a lot of people, including Damien's father. As his father grows more distant and his mum seeks deeper into, I don't know if it's out and out alcoholism, but definitely poor choices, heavily influenced by alcohol, Damien strives to make something of himself. And so, although there are parallels between this and Shuggy Bane, like I think it's quite easy to draw that, this is actually a much less bleak tale because, as we know, Damien has made something of himself. And this story is told with, heartwarming wit and charm. Definitely, you hear Damien's voice in his writing. He is lucky enough to find people who are there for him, and watching him grow, learning to embrace who he is, it's really a joy to share. So I found that because it's called Maggie and Me, which obviously refers to Maggie Thatcher, and it's like he's tracking Maggie's downfall alongside his own rise and the deterioration of his homeland or hometown as he himself blossoms. And for me, I guess that was a strong reminder that we are not always defined by our foundations, and that sometimes like the worst things can be the absolute making of us. So that was a really high note to end January on. As always, I'd love to know what you read in January. So if you've made a video wrapping up your month, then please let me know in the comments below. If you don't make videos or you haven't made one wrapping up January, just tell me what your favourite book that you read in January was. I'd also really like to know whether you like to read books about the area that you live or where you grew up, because it's not something I hear people talk about particularly a lot, and is that just one of my reading quirks? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop me a comment below, and until next time, bye. Kind of infiltrates the group. There are